I did want to say one thing about the grief sermon last week. I think a lot of you, I got a lot of responses. Sometimes, by the way, I don't get any responses, which is weird, because then I think, I wonder if it meant anything. But the grief one seemed to hit pretty hard, and I want to make sure that I'm clear about something about grief, is that grief does not help you find a purpose in what happened, right? I don't want you to be confused by that. Grief is not the explanation of what's going on or what happened. Grief is its own process, right? So it's important to grieve things, and it's its own category. So I don't want people to think, oh, if I grieve, then it'll make sense of what happened. That's not the goal. Does that make sense? So I know that's it. I also want to say what I didn't expect to happen in this series is we're going from emotion to emotion, and it feels a little fast. So I know that it's going to be a little bit overwhelming to go straight from grieving to jealousy. But there's a theme that is developing, you'll hopefully see, is that it's about aligning our emotions. So as long as you get out of this over the next year, as long as you kind of get out of this a conversation that starts between you and the Lord about how He feels about something versus how you feel about something, you don't even need to remember any of the sermons. My main goal, a win for me in all of this series, would be that you would have an ongoing conversation with the Lord about how He feels about things, because you might be surprised that He might feel differently than you. A lot of times when we're praying with people will say to me, I know God is mad at me, or I know that He's this, and a lot of times it's about us. It turns out that none of that's true. And we like to imagine that God feels the same way that we do. And if you get anything out of this whole year, I think you will hopefully come to that we really don't know how God feels about most things. And we really have to ask. Does that make sense? So the same thing is true. The other thing I want to say is that if we actually did all the direct emotions of God, it would be about 500 sermons. We're kind of picking and choosing a little bit. I'm trying to jump, and some of them will repeat, but they'll have a little bit of a different angle on the same emotion. Like we'll do anger and mercy, but then anger and compassion. Those are a little bit different. So you'll see that we're kind of going around. We're kind of getting pieces of the puzzle. But I don't want you to think that these are all of them, because if we did all of them, there would be a lot. So between the last one, which was the first emotion that was directly God's grieving, that's important. That's the first direct emotion in the Bible. The reason I wanted to do jealousy is because this is one of the first times that God talks about His emotion as if we did it. Or let me just say that back. We didn't give Him the attribute of jealousy. He calls Himself jealous. Right? So we could say one of the things about God is that He's jealous. That feels weird. But then if God says He's jealous, well, then it gives it a little bit more, makes us have to think, this is what He thinks about His own emotion, which is kind of interesting. So between last time and this time, there was actually a bunch of emotions. There's favor, there's pleasure, there's concern, there's compassion, there's anger. Those things happen between Genesis and Exodus. But the reason we're doing jealousy today is because it's about God talking about Himself, which I think is interesting. Let me give you the big idea. God's jealousy is covenantally ordered. This is going to be kind of there's a lot you could write down on this. You'll notice on your sheet, there's a target. So that, we're going to deal with that in a little bit. But this is going to be a little bit more of like a class maybe. So you might want to write down some of these because I'm picking very specific words. So God's jealousy is covenantally ordered. Ours is generally chaotic. Our jealousy is chaotic. It's not the same. Does this make sense? So God's is covenantally ordered. That's the big idea. So our jealousy is covenantally disordered. So we're in a covenant, but His is in order. Ours is generally out of order or disordered. Does this make sense? Okay. So the question that we're asking ourselves is my life aligned with God at the center, or are there other priorities? So that's what we're going to kind of be talking about today. Is God at the center? So a lot of people, especially guys, know this, that if you try to button from the middle, have you ever tried to put your shirt on and you button the middle button first? And then after you button it, somebody comes over to you and says, hey, your buttons are all out of order. You really have to start with, that's why actually on the shirts that I have, the bottom button is a different angle. And I think it's supposed to say this is the last button in case you don't know how to button your shirts. And then if you button them in order, then they come out straight. But if you try to start in the middle, a lot of times it comes out crooked, and your shirt's all like this. It happens to me all the time. Putting things back in priority, putting things back in order is what God is the best at. So when we compare ourselves to God, we will always find ourselves feeling chaotic compared to God, because God it makes sense. His order makes sense. Ours is chaotic, right? I mean, has anyone ever noticed that before? That like, if you compare yourself at all to God, you kind of go, man, it's not really fair. He's like, he knows exactly what he's doing, and I don't know what I'm doing. And what you should come to is like, he's big, we're little. He's awesome, we're not. Like those kind of things, right? In comparison, it gets kind of silly. So there are two things. There are kind of two things to this entire section. One is, if you put God back at the center, then you end up back in a covenant relationship. So it's all based on covenant relationship, which is important, right? Covenant is kind of the key to all of this. And two, when you reorder your relationship with God, all the other relationships line back up. So all of your earthly relationships will go back into place if God is the first button that you button. Does this make sense in the theme? So we're going to go to Exodus chapter 20. If you're not already there, we're going to be Exodus chapter 20, and this is what's commonly called the Ten Commandments. And if you were on the Torah Connections this last week, you heard me say that it doesn't really, later in the Bible it calls it the Ten Commandments, but really there are more commandments than 10. So really, if we were going to be literal about it, we would say these are the words that God wants us to know. And if any of you have worked for any kind of corporation, which most of you do on some level, you know that there's some sort of values that corporation has. And sometimes they put them on the wall, sometimes they put them in the bathroom, but generally they're trying to get everybody on. There's like an onboarding process, and they say, here are the things we care about, and they repeat those over and over and over. And they're foundational to everything else that happens at that company. And sometimes they make sense, sometimes they don't. But generally they're trying to get you to be like, if you work here, I'll give you a quick story. I heard the president of Ford one time speak, and he used to be the president of Boeing. And when he flew in to come to Ford the first time, they picked him up in a Range Rover. And he went, why are you picking me up in a Range Rover? And then they drove him into the executive parking lot, and the executive parking lot was full of BMWs and Mercedes. And he said, we work at Ford, right? If you guys don't drive Fords, why would anybody else drive a Ford? Right? I mean, it's kind of like, so he had to bring the entire company into alignment of either our cars are not good enough, or there's something wrong with what we even believe about ourselves, and had to bring it back into alignment. Does that make sense? And he spent a lot of time trying to redo the culture. That's what God is doing in Exodus. So Genesis is this huge paintbrush stroke. And then when we get to Exodus, there's a shift that happens, and it actually happens in the Torah portion with Jethro, where we go from redemption and salvation into formation. Now, this is true for us as individuals, that God always redeems us before he sanctifies us. He saves us before he transforms us, which means that there's a shift that happens in your relationship with him, hopefully at some point as you mature as a believer, that you go from being saved to somebody who's being formed. And the formation is way harder than being saved, because you don't do anything to get saved other than allow yourself to be saved. But then God says, now, okay, here's all the pieces that are left over from the last place you were in, and here's all the dirt that's on your body, and here's all the things that get in the way, here's all the garbage that you're standing in, and I'm going to remove all those things, and I'm going to peel off all the layers, and I'm going to wash you, and I'm going to change you into something else. So there's a shift that happens, and particularly when we get to mitzpatim, which is like the ordinances, all of a sudden there's a bunch of rules. And it's not that it's a checklist. What God's doing is saying, these are the values that matter to my people. In fact, when you read the Ten Commandments are not written in regular Hebrew grammar. They're almost written poetically, and you would almost be better to read them instead of thou shalt not, although that sounds really good. It really should be my people don't. Right? Because it's a category, it's a value statement. My people don't murder. And then, so if somebody says, well, I'm part of your people, and I murder, he goes, Do you see what I mean? Like, there's a sense of, this is what my people look like, match yourself to that. Here are the values. Same thing that happens at work. Do we drive Fords or not? God comes in and says, do our people murder? And then one person goes, well, I've murdered like 12 people. And he goes, okay, can you stop murdering? Maybe I can stop murdering, right? I mean, it's a sense of like, and you'll notice that the Ten Commandments have two pieces. There's first 5 are about God, the second 5 are about people. We know that the Ten Commandments generally follow the same pattern that Yeshua told us, which is love God, love your neighbor as yourself. So these are the foundational values. They're not the only things you need to know, but they are universally applicable to all people because it's the foundation of how God's people work. If you are part of his kingdom, these things should matter to you. Does that make sense, what the Ten Commandments are doing? Now, what's weird about the Ten Commandments is the first thing that God says is, I'm jealous. The last thing that God says is, don't covet. Isn't that weird? Because they feel the same. And when we talk about aligning ourselves with emotion, jealousy and coveting kind of is the same emotion for us, especially in our culture. Because I hear people say all the time, oh, I'm so jealous of your hair. Or I'm so jealous of your house. Or I'm so jealous of your... And we go, is that jealousy or is that coveting? So what we've done is we've redefined, we made it sound almost like jealousy's cute. Oh, I'm so jealous. And then people go, oh, don't be jealous. Don't be jealous. Tell me more. Don't be jealous. Like, let me show you my new thing, but don't be jealous. Oh, I'm so jealous. We talk about it like it's a great, right? But then we say, but don't covet. Now, what's hard is, coveting is a sin, and it takes up so much space in the Ten Commandments that there's more than 10 because of coveting. He gives a list of how you shouldn't covet. So we, as a culture, we go, we want to follow God, we want to have him at the center, but we're going to redefine all the categories. And we're going to change what all the words mean. And then we're going to say jealousy when we mean covet, and then we're going to be all confused about what jealousy means and what coveting means. In fact, I've never heard anybody say, oh, I covet your house. Man, I covet your hair, right? I mean, I do sometimes because I don't have any, but have you heard anybody say, no, because we have to make it sound like it's okay, right? So that means that proves to me that we're out of alignment as a culture and as people, because that if God can say he's jealous, and we're not saying God is a jealous God, he's saying, guess what, guys, I'm jealous, but you can't covet. So how do those two things go together, right? And we're going to that's what we're going to do today, is sort of have this conversation of how do we do this. I'm going to read this, just the first 6 verses, and then you're going to kind of get an idea. Hopefully you'll find this. Most of you have heard the 10 Commandments before, so I'm not going to do every commandment. This isn't a class on the commandments. It's a comparison between godly jealousy and disordered covenantal coveting. Does that make sense? And I'm being really specific on purpose. Okay. So it says, then God spoke all these words, not just the 10, but he spoke all of these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make yourself an idol or anything of likeness in heaven and above, or in earth below, in the water or under the earth. You shall not worship them nor serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers of the children on the children, on the 3rd and 4th generations of those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Notice, he is making a distinction, right? He's saying, these are the kinds of people, how can I tell if people love me or not? And right? That's what he's doing. He's kind of making, like, are you on this side or are you on this side? Do you love me or do you hate me? If you love me, you follow my commandments. By the way, Yeshua said the exact same thing in the New Testament, right? He says, if you love me, you'll follow my commandments. And by the way, here's a new commandment. Love one another the way that I love you. It turns out not really a new commandment. Right? But he kind of gives this idea. So you see this continuity all through Scripture, throughout the Torah, the prophets, the writings, all the way through the New Testament to the book of Revelation. There's this sense of God is judging whether we're in relationship with him, because remember, everything filters through love, because God is love. So all the other emotions filter through love. And he calls himself jealous, which I think is really, it's interesting that he declares that. It's not a human description. It's a declaration of God. Okay, so I'm going to go back just for a second. He says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. What is he actually doing here? He's trying to tell us that redemption happens before commandments, right? That he saves us before he tells us what to do. A lot of people say, oh, I don't want to listen to God because he's just going to give me a list of rules. Well, that's usually because we present it that way. As believers, we say, here's God and he has a bunch of rules. What we forgot to tell people is, here's God, he saved you, and now he wants to transform you. That's what we're really saying. But it comes out like, here's the Bible, smack you across the face. Like, don't you know liars go to hell? Like, have you ever heard anybody say that? And you go, what? Like, like, that is not the way God presents it. That's the way we present it, because we're kind of an angry, we like revenge as human beings, right? We really want God to strike people down. We actually want the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to actually be the gods of Egypt. We actually want the God of Israel to really be the Greek gods, because we want them to be a little bit more angry. We want them to like really strike down the people we hate. But what God keeps telling us about himself is, I save people before I transform them. Which is weird, because when we invite people to our congregation, do we want them to be transformed before they get here? Right? I mean, think about it. We almost go, well, that's just inappropriate behavior. And we go, but this is unbelievable. If a brand new person who never knew God before walks in, how do we expect them to act? Right? But we make it sound like salvation comes after you prove yourself. That's not the way God presents it. And remember, this is the foundation. In God's kingdom, he saves before he gives us commandments. Imagine if somebody presented the gospel that way to you, or if you could give that to somebody else. I mean, think about, like, again, we're putting this back into alignment. It's not that both those things don't matter. Salvation matters, transformation matters, formation matters. God's commandments matter. In fact, he says, if you love me, you follow my commandments. But why do we love him? Because he first loved us. Right? We don't automatically go, man, God is great just because he's great. That's not who we are. We live in a broken world full of broken things, right? And human beings don't automatically start off that way. So he tells us, I'm the one that got you out of Egypt. Now, what's funny is, in a couple chapters, we're going to turn around and say, no, this calf got us out of Egypt. And then God gets really jealous. So he tells them in advance, hey, we have a relationship. The relationship started with me saving you. Now, what I'm hoping you'll get out of this in this particular section is, maybe we don't give enough weight to the covenant that God has with us. And if we don't understand the weight of the covenant that we have with God, then all of our other relationships are going to be out of alignment. They're going to be all broken. We're going to misappropriate. We're going to be like crossing lines that don't have real lines. We're going to have boundaries where boundaries shouldn't be. We're going to end up controlling things as opposed to loving things. We're going to grab things instead of allowing things to happen, right? Because all of a sudden, every relationship goes out of alignment. Every relationship gets disjointed. But God saves. He redeems before he gives us any commands. Okay, verses 3 and 4, it says, you shall have no other gods before me. I mean, literally, he means don't put any in front of me. Because when you walk into the temple, if the temple was full of other gods, can you imagine if you had to push through all those other, gods? I mean, he's being very literal here, because in that culture, they set up gods everywhere they went, right? They built idols. And by the way, an idol is a divine image of something. It's not, in Judaism, we try really hard not to break this verse, so we say, don't make any images of anything. So most of our artwork is not even realistic, because we're trying to be really careful not to make images. But this is being very specific. Don't make any images. In fact, we know this is true because when God tells us to build a temple, he says, make this look like a bull, make this look like cherubim, make this look like pomegranates. Well, those are things that are on the earth and in heaven and on the earth, right? So why would he say not to do that, but then also do it? Well, because he's not saying that you can't have a painting of a bird. He's saying, don't put a bird in your house and call it God. Do you see? Because he wants us to worship the God of creation, not the creation itself. So he's saying, don't make an image of a thing and then call that God, which, by the way, in the next couple chapters, they're going to go, here's a cow. That's our God. So he's getting ahead of them. He's saying, listen, guys, in a few minutes, you're going to do something terrible. Could you maybe try not to? And they go, yeah, we're all about that. We want to hear you. We'll do whatever you tell us to do. And then God starts speaking, and everybody goes, okay, that's a little much, God. Right? Isn't that how human beings, isn't that the way we respond? We say, God, I will do whatever you want. And then God says, okay, I would like you to give up blank. And you go, well, that's just too much. Right? I can't do that. So what he's trying to do is put it back into alignment of what is this relationship? So knowing that he saves us before we're in relationship is a big deal, because he loves us before we love him. And then this idea that he's the one, he's saying, don't put anything else in front of me. Don't make images of things that will get in my way. And he doesn't mean any images. You can't have paintings. He's saying, don't put anything in front of me and pretend it's me. Right? Which is, I mean, could you imagine? I mean, I know it's Valentine's Day, so could you imagine I just make a cutout of myself and I put it in the house, right? I mean, this is an image of me, right? And then Heather goes, I like this one better because he doesn't talk so much, or, or something like that, right? Like, could you imagine it would be like, then all of a sudden, this is an easier relationship because he doesn't ask me for anything, right? He doesn't say any weird things, right? I like the image better. We do that all the time, right? I mean, think about as people. So God's saying, don't do that. Don't put an image of me. And by the way, do you think I would get jealous? And this is where you'll start seeing where we're going here, is if we're in a relationship and there are any other images, it would make sense that I would be jealous of those things because they're not me. And we have a commitment that we made. Do you see what's happening? So it's covenantal. God's relationship with us is a covenantal jealousy. He makes sure that we understand it. I'm the one that got you out of Egypt. I'm the one that saved you. I'm the one that brought you out of darkness and into light. I'm the one that brought you from slavery into freedom. And we made a deal. In fact, the chapter before this, he said, will you guys make a deal? They said, yeah, we'll make a deal. We agree. Whatever you tell us, we'll do. And then God says, okay, well, here's my values. And they go, I don't know. Would you tell Moses about it? Right? And then Moses gets to be in God's glory, and they're so freaked out when he shows up because he comes back glowing. And they go, where have you been? What, do you think you're the only one? And he goes, what? I can imagine Moses goes, you guys sent me up there. Right? I mean, think about the conversation, right? So as human beings, we have a tendency to distance ourselves from God when he's just trying to give us his values. He's the one that saves us. He loves us before we loved him. Right? He's in covenant with us. So part of what we have to do, and we have to ask ourselves today is, do I really feel the weight of the fact that I'm in a covenant with the God of the universe? A covenant is like a contract, but holds a lot more weight. Right? There had to be something that was cut. You can't go back. Right? We've cut this now. That's what covenant means, right? It's literally a cutting. We split it up. We walked through. We made a deal. There was a ceremony. There was like a handshake. There was a commitment, right? This is like, we didn't just shake on this. This was not just verbal. There was like, we sat down and negotiated and you said yes. Now, I'm telling you that if you don't hold up your end of the bargain, I'm going to be jealous. Now, it's interesting because I remember as a kid thinking, well, I thought jealousy was a bad thing. I feel like generally when people say, don't be jealous, right? I generally only have heard when I was a kid, it's not my parents' fault, but generally from culture, you're not supposed to be jealous. But if God is jealous, then all of a sudden you go, well, what's the difference between God's jealousy and my jealousy? Well, I think, and I'm going to just say this, we're getting ahead on the sermon, but I think it's because we've redefined what jealousy is. We've turned coveting into jealousy so that we feel better about coveting. And God's not talking about coveting. He's talking about something that we own, that we are in a committed covenantal relationship. And if you are in a covenantal relationship with someone, then it makes sense that they would be jealous that you would be in a contract with anyone else. This is exclusive, right? There's exclusivity to this deal. There's no other gods. So if there's no other gods, anytime you bring in a god, he goes, what the heck? Just like if you brought in another girl, or you brought in another guy, or there would be wait a minute, we made an exclusive deal. Do you see what's happening? That's what God's saying, covenantal. Totally, I think it makes sense. When you put it back in its context, you go, oh, the reason he can be jealous is because of the kind of deal that we made. Now, I've heard people say, why can God be jealous? Oh, because he's God. Well, that's not really fair, because then it's just like, well, God can do whatever. What I think is, putting this back in context, if you take redemption out of it, it makes it very insecure, right? If there's no redemption, if God didn't do anything to make a covenant with us, then it's just sort of like, well, we have to because he's God, because God is God and I'm a person and I'm afraid of God. Well, that's one aspect, but in theology, it's never one or the other. A lot of times it's both and, right? And there's this sense of when redemption is a part of the story, when we recognize what God has done to make us a part of the covenant, then it actually shows God as faithful. And when you see God as faithful and the covenant is broken, then who's the one that's unfaithful? It's us. If God is faithful, do you see what I'm saying? Like if you follow this idea, he made a covenant, and because of redemption, he has done all the things. If we said, here are all the things that make a covenant, God has done all those things. What's left? The things that we're supposed to do, which we generally don't do. And most of the time, we don't even have that much responsibility. generally what God wants us to do is just accept the covenant. I mean, he like hands us the entire thing and just says, okay, I will do all the work. All you do is accept it and enjoy being a part of the community. And then we go, oh, that sounds good, right? And then we sign, and then he says, okay, well, just so you know, my people don't do this, this, and this. And we go, oh, well, if you know, I didn't know there were going to be rules, right? That's kind of what happened. I thought it was funny with the kids. What are the rules? Well, I don't know. You know, oh, well, now there's rules? You know, it's like kids know sometimes that we don't have rules. Okay, so here's the question. If jealousy is where covenant exists, is God the center of all of your relationships? And this is kind of where we're going to head, right? So think about, you can actually look at that chart that's on there. I made the sermon questions really small, but you can look at that chart. Is God at the center of your covenant relationship? Does that make sense? I remember when I was in college, a different girl, not my wife. I don't think she's in here, so I can tell you this story. Okay. So there was this one girl that a bunch of us liked. She was like head of the missions thing, so everybody thought she was the best because she wanted to be a missionary. But for some reason, there were all these guys that liked her. Back then, there was a book called I Kissed Dating Goodbye, so nobody was allowed to date anybody. So nobody went on any dates, but there were clearly people who hung out with her and paid, so I felt like that was dating, including me. I paid for dinner. I don't know what that's called, but we were not dating because we kissed it goodbye, but we were hanging out, if you guys remember that. So there were all these people that also liked her, and there was there was multiple times where multiple people, and by the way, I mean, she probably watches these, so I'm a little bit weird. She might send me a message, but she was not that awesome that deserved that much fighting. No, I'm saying, there are no girls, let me just say, there are no girls who deserve that much fighting. There was something oddly spiritual happening, honestly, because it just didn't make sense that there was, and I think it's because all of us were focused on her. Wait, I want to be clear. Don't laugh too much, right? This is what happens in college. Young people. Our relationships with the person that we want to be with becomes more important than God. So why do we end up fighting with each other? Because all of our stuff's out of alignment. Instead of becoming the person that God wanted me to be, I spent my time waiting for her. Do you see where we're getting? So if my relationship with God got stronger, then I would have been the best person on the list, which I didn't learn until Heather, right? I had to figure out that I needed to if my relationship with God was better, then that would be more exciting to the one that I wanted, as opposed to focusing on her. All of a sudden, what does that mean is my relationship with the girl actually became an image in front of God. It becomes an idol. And me fighting with another guy over whether we're dating or she's dating or whether we're all dating and who's dating who, right? I mean, this is not a triangle. This was like a quadrilateral. I mean, it was like this, there were all these people, right? All of that dilemma was because it was out of order. And what I could even say now looking back was none of that was jealousy. It was all coveting. And you know how I know that you can tell the difference between coveting and jealousy? Whether you're grabbing or not. If you feel like you need to grab it, that's probably not jealousy. It's probably coveting. In any relationship. If you have to pull it, right, that's coveting. Or at the very least, it's close to coveting. I know someone's going to say, yeah, but is there an in-between? There is a little bit of an in-between, and we're going to get there. But do you see where we're kind of going? Now, what's funny is the first commandment is essentially built into God is jealous. Do we carry the weight of the fact that there should only be one relationship that matters more than all other relationships? Now, so I remember, I didn't make this up, by the way. I was really upset because of this girl. And I went to one of my professors, and I was like, I don't know what I'm doing wrong. And he goes, okay, think of it like a dartboard. Here's you and God in the middle. And all these other relationships, people come in and out of those circles. He goes, she's not even in that circle. But you're acting as if she's in that circle, and that's why you're so upset. You've made no exclusive deal. You're not even dating. And then I go, yeah, but that's because of the stupid book. Right? And he goes, but even if you're dating, you're not married. You're not, so he goes, where are you actually on the circles? Because he drew it out. And he said, and so how much exclusivity is there? And do you deserve to be jealous? And I was like, no. And then all of a sudden, by the way, the spiritual stuff went away. I mean, if you know what I mean, all the smoke and mirrors that the devil likes to put in. And when you start putting things back into the correct order, you start going, oh, I'm not even sure if this is the person I really want. It's weird. Because the fight makes you want to fight, at least for me, because I can be competitive on certain things. All of a sudden, it was about winning, not so much about whether it was right. And doesn't that happen? So all of a sudden, it's like, well, I got passed over at work, or how come they have a nicer house, or why did they get the car, or why did they get the person, right? We have all these things that we compare ourselves to everybody else. I mean, that's what social media is just comparing ourselves, right? We go on there for 10 minutes, and you're like, oh, I hate their house, and I hate their stuff in it, right? I mean, I love watching that $1 million HGTV show. The people win the lotto, and then they go and they, and then my favorite thing, have you ever watched that show where the guy, he shows them, they win like the lotto, and then they buy a really nice house? And then if you watch the really old episodes, you can now look up those houses and see if those people still live there. And what you're going to find out is they do not. Because you know what people do with their money? It ruins their life. I mean, it becomes this whole thing. On the show, it's great. You're thinking, man, I want to buy a house with 40 acres on a mountain, right? Oh, well, not in 2009 you don't. I mean, it's kind of like, it becomes this whole, you start going, okay, the grass always looks greener on the other side. And then we have to put ourselves back into whether our emotions are aligned with God's emotions, or are we just making this stuff up? Are we just reacting to one another? Are we just human beings fighting with one another? Do you guys follow me on this? I hope you're getting it. Okay, so we're going to jump all the way down to verse 17, because this is the end of the Ten Commandments. It says, you shall not cover your neighbor's house, which we just talked about. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, which we also talked about, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. And in Judaism, we came up with a great way around this. We said, well, but who's my neighbor? And then Yeshua said, everybody. And then we were like, oh, that ruins it. Because it used to be that I could say us and them. They're not from here, so I have to treat my neighbors right, but those people we can lie to. You know, it's always, and we still do that. I mean, that's like, all you got to do is watch a little bit of the news, and you'll see people doing that all the time, right? All we have to do is dehumanize somebody, put them on the outside of the circles completely, right? You look in history, right? We have God, marriage, family, community, neighbor, humanity, and then we add a new category of those humans I don't like who aren't really human. That's history. How do we do that? That's what happened to us as Jewish people, right? We got dehumanized. We're not really Germans. Right? All you have to do is say they're not really Russian. And where would those borders even come from? We made up those borders. It was us versus them. It's actually a bunch of cousins who married each other, by the way. They all married each other. They all got in charge. They put themselves in charge of something. They all said they were ordained by God. And then they turned around and said, and you don't actually belong here. In fact, you don't even really count as a human. That's what happened in slavery in the United States. We said, well, you're sort of human. We're like 3/4 human. So you get 3/4 of a response. You see what happens? So when we put ourselves back into the biblical categories, then all of a sudden you can't treat people that way. And then it makes sense. So God at the center, right? You go all the way back. The first commandment is God is jealous. Now what he's not saying is that he's sinning. He's not saying that God covet. God doesn't say I covet. God doesn't have to take anything. It already belongs to him. Right? God is jealous because he's in covenant relationship. So when we talk about jealousy of others, are we talking about within the kind of a relationship that we actually have, or is it the relationship that we want? If it's just the relationship that we want, then we're sliding toward coveting. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a big difference between marriage and family and community, and there's probably even a middle in there because there's nothing that says friends on there, but there's a huge difference between family and friends and community, communities and neighbors, and then neighbors and humanity. And those all deserve different levels of exclusivity. And they don't all get covenants, right? Which means they all have different responses. You guys follow me on this? Okay. So, the Ten Commandments begin with divine jealousy. They begin with order, but they end with disorder. Do you see what God's doing? He's saying, you're out of order if you're coveting, but you're in order if you recognize why I'm jealous. I know I feel like this is like a little bit complex. I hope it's not too complex, right? It feels like, and I hope it's a different way of looking at the Ten Commandments, because essentially what God's trying to say is you might not take your relationship with me as seriously as you should, and if you took your relationship with me as seriously as you should, all of your other relationships will fall into place. But because we don't want to talk to God, all of our relationships are out of order. And he's trying to tell us, because remember, it starts with God and it ends with people. So if we have God first, we figure out God first, then the rest of it lines up. I mean, that's what the Ten Commandments are. These are his values. These are the things that God thinks matter to all of humanity. This is the way all humans should treat each other. It's, by the way, the foundation of the system of justice that we have in the world comes from this. Right? This is why, I mean, the Ten Commandments might be one of the most important foundational documents in the entire universe. I mean, when you think about, I mean, the Constitution's pretty good, but if we didn't have the Ten Commandments, the Constitution wouldn't make much sense. Do you see what I mean? Because it's inalienable rights given to us by God. Well, then, what does his community actually look like? What does his family look like? Is this making sense to everybody? Okay. So, we're going to do something I don't normally do because we're not going to do all the verses. But I want to break down these, because the rest of the chapter tells us how to, it's really what it's doing is teaching us how to protect the alignment. Make sense? So God is in the center, and we have to take very seriously that we're in covenant with him. If we are in covenant with him, then God takes it very seriously. There should be some weight on that. When you think, ooh, I have a deal with God, you should feel some weight on your shoulders. Do you see what I mean? Okay. The rest of the chapter, and really what this whole chapter is about, is how do we protect that alignment? Because God, one of the things that's amazing about holiness is God calls us holy, but then tells us how to protect that holiness. What he doesn't expect us to do is to be holy to get in. We get in because we're sinners saved by grace, but then once we're in, we have to protect that holiness. So it's not that God says you have to be clean to get in. He says, once you're in, now get clean. Does that make sense? And by the way, now that you're clean, try not to get dirty again. I mean, don't we tell our kids that? You just took a shower. Don't go in the mud, especially right now when the weather's changing and it's really muddy. When you go outside, please don't. You just bought those shoes. We're trying to protect the shoes. So God gives us his sense of who he is. He's the one that saves us. He's the one that redeems us. He's the one that makes us his people. We have a covenant. We have a deal with him. That deal is heavy. It makes him jealous when we have any other images, any other things that represent. And by the way, when he talks about himself, so he wants us to protect what? Like his image, his presence, his name, right? Think about it. These are the Ten Commandments, right? When we say don't use God's name in vain, we're not talking about cursing. I mean, we've reduced it to cursing, but really God's saying don't call anything me when it's not me. And don't call anything that I said not me. Because that's what most people do. They say, oh, God didn't say that. Or they'll say, didn't God say? Right? What is that? That's a whole bunch of images. It's a whole bunch of, I thought, right? So he's saying we filled the room up with all these images that are not him, and we spend most of the time praying to false images. And he's saying, but we had a deal. I saved you, you accepted that salvation, now there's a deal. Right? I mean, do you feel the weight of that? I hope you kind of feel the weight of that. Now everything else lines up. So the rest of this chapter, so I'm going to kind of break it down, and I don't want you to think that this is like just like psychology. Not that I have a problem necessarily with psychology if it lines up with Scripture. But I don't want you to think that this is a psychological method. What I want you to see is that this is an illustration that helps us understand the Ten Commandments. Okay, I want to be very clear about that. Because these categories come from the Ten Commandments. Does that make sense? Okay, so so he wants us to protect his name. He wants us to protect his presence. He wants us to protect time, by the way, the Sabbath, protect time. And then later, when it comes to other people, he wants us to protect and honor people, honor life, honor marriage, honor property, and honor reputation. Right? That's the Ten Commandments. Right? So we honor God, we love God, and we love our neighbor, generally. So when we look at just the first five, we can ask ourselves the question, does my life revolve around God, or does God revolve around my life? Do you see that this is the thing? Because if we're in covenant with him and he's trying to align us, then the first question we have to ask ourselves is, do we want him to act like us, or do we want to act like him? I mean, that's an important question. And does my life revolve around him? And I would say, do all my relationships revolve around him? Or do I want him to approve of all my relationships? Do you see, they're real close, but they're a little bit different. They're out of order. It's just priority list. And by the way, expectations too. Okay. So the first one we're going to start with is humanity. We're going to go all the way to the end. If you want to write this, you can. Now we're going to ask two questions. What's the weight, and is it exclusive? I mean, this is kind of an easy way to do it, but you can read through the Bible if you want. You can test me on this. Go through the whole Bible and try to find verses that are different than this. But generally, God wants us to treat humanity with a certain amount of respect, a certain amount of honor, a certain amount of dignity. But it is not exclusive. We don't owe humanity really much. We're not in covenant with humanity, with all of humanity. Right? There is a level of how we're supposed to treat each other, and that basic level is pretty good. I mean, we're supposed to treat each other pretty well. We are meant to redeem the world, but with humanity, the weight is not as heavy, and I would say the further you go on this, the weight should be less. Theologically, covenantally, the weight should be less the further away it is from God. So all of humanity, do we give people respect? Absolutely. Should we give people a certain amount of dignity? There should be justice. There should be life. We should care about life in humanity, right? Those things. Right? I think you can kind of agree with that. But it's not exclusive. There's no exclusivity at all. In fact, jealousy doesn't belong in this category. So being jealous of other humans, that doesn't really make sense when it comes to godly jealousy, because godly jealousy is covenantally bound. Are you following me on this? So if we're jealous of other humans, then we're not actually jealous. It's a different emotion. It's a different feeling. In fact, it's a different action. Are you following me on this? So I know that this is hard. This is hard because what you're going to start realizing as we go through this is, oh man, I covet a lot. I mean, even in preparing this, I was like, oh man, I mostly covet. I mostly covet. And by the way, I'm not jealous about the same things God is jealous about. So all of a sudden, I'm all out of order. My relationships are out of order. My priorities are out of order. The things that I'm upset about are out of order. Right? I mean, this gets heavy pretty quick. So humanity, there's no exclusivity. There's no covenant with all of humanity. I mean, I'm saying between us and other humans. But there is a certain amount of respect. We know that we all reflect God's who He is on some level. We're all created in His image, so there's a certain level. But humanity in general. You could even take this further and just talk about creation. We have a responsibility to creation, but it's not covenantally bound the same way. This making sense? Okay. So now ask yourself the weight of a neighbor. So neighbors, well, generally we have boundaries with neighbors. We know our neighbors. They're not our best friends. Sometimes we want to be friends with our neighbors. Sometimes you get to be friends with your neighbors, but they might not be part of your community, right? Which is why sometimes people call, and we call everything our communities, right? I mean, this is why the categories are all crazy. It used to be, before the internet, that we didn't have any communities that we were not actually a part of. Once the internet started, then we got these little rooms. Remember we had chat rooms, and then you get to be a part of that room, and now you're in the community. I mean, it used to be that if you were going to do something weird, you would have to do that in your mom's basement. Now there's conventions for it. You can join that community. There's newsletters. There's a community for everything. But it's because we've made everything a community. So look at what we've done is we've taken humanity and we said, oh, we're in this global community. And you go, well, hold on a second. Right? This is why it's so hard. We can't take care of everybody's problems in the whole world. And if you spend about a half hour on the internet, you're going to be bombarded with every single person's problem. You're going to find about all the people that were murdered, all the people that were hurt, all the people that were kidnapped, and you're going to just be overwhelmed. Because you feel responsible for those people that you've never met, because you feel like you're kind of in a community. But you're not really in a community. In fact, they're not even your neighbors who live next door to you. These are people who live thousands of miles away. Right? I mean, because what's happened is that we've been sort of shoved into this new idea. The categories have all changed. So when you talk about a neighbor, and I'm not talking about the way Yeshua is talking about how all people are technically our neighbor. We're supposed to love even our enemies, is what he's saying. But our actual neighbors, the people who live near us, right, the people who we call neighbors, there's boundaries, but there's no exclusivity. I don't have a deal with my neighbor. This is why if he burns my fence down, which you've heard he keeps doing, right? I can't wait. I mean, the weather changes. He's going to start burning my fence down again, right? There's a boundary, a literal boundary that he burns down, right? We don't have a deal. Do you see what I'm saying? There's no covenant. So it becomes transactional. And what I mean by transactional is, hey, you owe me a fence because you burnt my fence down. And he goes, I don't owe you a fence. I'm like, well, you do, because you burnt it down. We're not friends. Do you see what I'm saying? I mean, it really comes down to that. We're not really friends. I mean, even if I hang out at his house, I know I watched his kids grow up. I'm glad for we went to some of their games. We could become friends, but if we're friends, well, now we're in a different category, right? We're starting to turn into a different category. Do you see what I'm saying? Now, community, this is a community, right? Is there a covenant for a community? Well, not really. We're not still talking about community. And a lot of times we confuse community with friendship. This happens all the time. Like, I'll tell you the thing that happens the most in our congregation is somebody from our care ministry will go visit you in the hospital, and then I'll get a phone call and say, how come nobody showed up? And we'll say, like, 20 people showed up. Oh, those are my friends. And we go, were those your friends, or were they sent by the congregation? I mean, do I need to have like a... So we actually made cards. We just got them that say, the rabbi sent me to you, so you know. Because otherwise people go, my friends showed up, but none of the people from the congregation. You go, well, how many is none? They're like, only 20. And I go, 20? That's like 20% of our congregation showed up. That's a big chunk showed up, right? Like we have people, and oh, but just my friends. It's like, well, because what happens is we start thinking that because we're in community that we're also friends, because we also use the word family. What we mean is we're not actually a family, but we should treat each other like a family. Do you see what I'm saying? So you see this all through in Scripture. It's like Scripture's trying to be very clear about these things, but there's still no covenant. There's still no thing that I signed, right? There was no contract that said, oh, and by the way, I'm going to hang out with you no matter what's happening, or you're going to be able to come over no matter what, right? I mean, there's like this. Do you see what I'm saying, right? And that's why it gets all confused. And I actually think this is where what we call jealousy, but really coveting starts coming in. Because then we start saying, well, how come you can do it with this person? And how come you can be with this? And how come you can do... And what we're really doing is we're calling it jealousy, but is it really jealousy? Because there's no contract that was made. I mean, I know this sounds maybe too cold, but I hope you're understanding that this is what God's trying to say. Because if we treat our relationships this way, then we sort of move God out of the center. And that's the problem, is it becomes out of alignment and it becomes this weird amalgamous mess. And all of a sudden we're treating humanity as if we're in covenant, or our neighbors as if they're our friends, or our community as if they're our family, and our families as if we're married, right? This is why teenagers mess this up all the time. They go immediately from dating to like, have you ever noticed? I mean, when a lot of the older people in here remember what it was like where you would date somebody and then you would go steady and then they'd get a pin. Like there was like a process. Now people are like, this is my girlfriend. And you go, you skipped all the steps. And this is why they're all confused, because if you go straight to girlfriend, you're like, we're pretty much married. Well, then what do you think's next? Right? Why do they do that? Because they feel exclusive. And then they feel bad. They actually say, well, I feel bad. I told her she's my girlfriend. And you go, well, you shouldn't. When did you make that deal? Do you see what I'm saying? You never should have made that deal. And they say, and the worst thing is people say, well, how do I know? This is where we know culture has flipped this around. They go, how do I know if I'm compatible with this person if I don't live with them first? And how do I know? I've even heard people say to me recently, how do we know if we're sexually compatible? And I go, listen, it's not that complicated. You're compatible, right? I mean, but they have this thing where, well, we have to try it first. And we have to figure it out. What they're doing is they're mashing all these categories together. And by the way, when you spend all your time trying to figure that out, guess where God ends up? Nowhere in that conversation. Because we have a covenant with God, and we treat that like we don't even want to talk to him. And then when it comes to dating or relationships, we go, oh, well, am I not friends with the people on the internet? I'm just going to tell you right now, they're not your friends. When you're in the hospital, is your friend on the internet going to come and visit? Probably not. Now, if they do, keep that friend, because that's a real friend. I mean, but I'm just saying, most of the time, not. It's the same reason why if you watch all these internet prophets, they're not going to do a funeral for you. Because they're not actually your pastor. I mean, this is the problem, is all of our relationships are all squished together and messed up. But the Ten Commandments are telling us, love God, love your neighbor. You kind of have to know which is which. God or your neighbor. I mean, which one is it? So we treat as if, and then, by the way, not only do we treat other people, but we expect other people to treat us like we're family. And even more, we treat each other as if we're married. I mean, I'm not just talking about sex out of wedlock. I'm saying we expect other people to show up like as if we're in a covenant. Do you see the problem? Now, this is weird. I know this is like a weird sermon, but by the way, this is all the Ten Commandments. If I went back through and you saw it, what are we supposed to do? Love God, don't have idols, worship only him. He's jealous if we don't follow his commandments. Don't take the Lord's name in vain. honor the Sabbath day, don't work on the Sabbath, right? Then it shifts and it says, honor your mother and father. And then we say, well, how do we do that? Well, first, it would be helpful if you treated them like you were your mom and your dad. Like, you see what I'm saying? Like, you have to know who your parents are before, if you're going to honor them. But now we have a global village with all these different moms and dads. We say, well, I'm supposed to listen to all these people, because aren't all these people my elders? And I get all these confused young people that say, yeah, but this person told me and they prophesied over me. And I go, are they your mom? Are they your dad? Are they your pastor? Are they God? And they go, no. And I said, so then why are you putting them in this category as if they get responsibility over your life? I mean, think about how, I'm hoping you're seeing that, like, when you go through the Ten Commandments, it's a lot more about what our responsibility is to one another and the covenantal relationship that we have with God. You guys kind of following this? I hope you are. I hope this is making sense. Okay, so here's how you do it. Ask about the weight, ask out about the exclusivity. So if you're confused later when you have this and you want to go through this chart and you're trying to figure out if somebody's your friend or not, figure out how much weight and is it exclusive? Do you see what I'm saying? And if it's not exclusive, then you're probably not jealous. You're probably coveting. Do you see? I mean, or something in between. At the very least, it could be envy, which is also not great. Right? Do you see what I'm saying? Like, there's these problems with all of these categories. So humanity, neighbors, community. In between community and family is probably friendship. But friendship's a little bit weirder because you can be friendly with people. I've tried it. It's funny. When you compare Joey to Rachel, my two kids, Rachel doesn't think anybody's her friend unless they have a real conversation. Joey thinks everybody's his friend. So the difference, I'll tell you how this works. When we go to an event at the high school, Rachel, two girls come up and they go into a corner and they have a discussion about philosophy. When we go to the high school with Joey, he high-fives every kid down the hallway. If I said to them, which ones are your friends? Joey goes, these are all my friends. I go, which one are your friends, Rachel? She goes, I don't, all these people talk. She goes, what's the point of small talk? And I go, oh, okay. So you guys both have these extreme versions of friendship. So I tell Rachel, I said, some of these people are actually your friends. You're just not counting them. And then I have to tell Joey, these are not your friends. Right? Because they're both confused just on two opposite, because he's friends with every single person, right? And then what happens is when he's friends with everybody, this is what happened. We went to this thing the other night about sports, and by the time we were done, he had signed up for football in the fall, wrestling in the winter, lacrosse in the spring, and then baseball workouts during the summer. And I said, "How did you do?" And he goes, "I think I might also do cross country." And I said, "You can't do all those things." And he said, "Why not?" I said, "Because you also are a student." Right? I mean, categories matter, right? Like, you have to know why you're there. You're at school. You're not in school to play sports and to make friends. Although I hope you make friends while you're at school. Do you see what I'm saying? Like, and by the way, we keep telling them they don't believe us. They'll find out later that your real friends end up being the ones from college anyway. I mean, you don't, like, high school sometimes, but not really, because lives kind of diverge, right? And by the way, like my professor said, people come in and out of all of these categories. You can have somebody who's part of humanity who becomes your close friend. That's possible. I mean, I heard about one this week I couldn't believe. A person who was writing letters to somebody and then they became one of their close friends. I think that's amazing, right? So that can happen. Those things can change. But what you don't want to do is become jealous of something that's in the wrong category, because then it's probably not really jealousy. Is this sort of making sense? I hope it does. Okay, so we keep going. Now, family is a whole different category. Now, I might lean too much on this because of my Italian side, but blood is kind of a thing that I grew up with, right? Family is family. You do things for family you don't do for other people. There's obligations you have to family that you're not obligated to other people because they're your family, right? I mean, that's kind of what happens. It's not the same thing as this community. We don't have the same obligation, but we are moving closer and closer to exclusivity. When you're in a family, it's a lot more exclusive than when you're in a community. And a community is more exclusive than a neighborhood, and a neighborhood is more exclusive than all of humanity. Do you see what I'm saying? It gets more and more exclusive. But then at some point, what you're looking for is that one person it's only you and them. I mean, that's marriage, right? That there's a partnership. And that one comes with a covenant. There's an actual covenant that's made. By the way, both in promise and also in blood. I mean, there's literally a real covenant that happens. God gave us marriage so that we could understand covenant and understand what jealousy really is, because when I'm jealous about my wife, God is more jealous of me. right? In the sense of like, if I don't hold on to his covenant. He is more jealous about my relationship with him than I am more jealous about my relationship with my wife. So if I feel any jealousy at all, multiply that by a lot. Because God made a covenant with us, and that carries more weight. And what I tell people, it happens in every premarital counseling, that the best way to be closer to your spouse is to get closer to God. And we think that we can get closer to our spouse without getting closer to God. It doesn't work. Right? So there's this sense of, because the most important covenantal relationship in the center is God. You guys kind of follow me in this? And by the way, look at the way the Ten Commandments work out. The first 5 are about God, loving him, loving his name, protecting his presence, protecting the Sabbath, protecting, right, all of these things that he created. And then he shifts and says, and it also matters to your parents, and it also happens to your neighbors. You see, he does the same thing. It's the same. This is really the Ten Commandments just in circles. But it's saying a lot more than just follow these commandments. It's saying this is actually how you make relationships, and those relationships have to have the right weight, and you have to know whether they're exclusive or not, because if you put too much weight and too much exclusivity on any of the relationships that don't deserve covenants, you're going to end up in a really weird place. And you look at all the relationships in the world, most of them have exclusivity when they shouldn't. I mean, you can think about it, right? You say, oh, well, this is the problem. If you look at the relationships around you, like in your family, you go, why does this bother me so much? Well, it's because it was never meant to be exclusive, right? And it's not the way God designed it, and it for sure is not going to teach you what it's meant to teach you, because relationships are supposed to teach us something about God, because God is relational. God has emotions. So, and by the way, if we're going to be jealous, which by the way I would argue for that it's important to learn jealousy so you could actually be jealous. Jealousy is a thing that God wants, right? He is jealous. So that means that I can be jealous. Do you see what I'm saying? But of the right things. If not, he would then not tell me that coveting is a sin. I mean, this is where it gets heavy. Jealousy is right in its right category. Coveting is a sin. They feel the exact same way to me. I don't know about you, but they feel the same. They feel the same. So God is like splitting down this thing of what's the difference, whether or not there's a covenant. And by the way, our first covenant is with God. So then all of a sudden the weight goes on him. You just follow me on this? I hope you get it. Okay. So marriage, obviously. So let me say it this way. Jealousy is meant to protect fidelity, not ego. Okay, so the reason we get messed up with jealousy is it's usually about us. But godly jealousy is protecting the fidelity of the agreement. Do you follow what I'm saying? Like, you become a protector. When you're really jealous about the right things, you're protecting the fidelity of the covenant. You're saying, this exclusivity matters to me. That's real jealousy. Once it becomes controlling, once it becomes about grasping, once it becomes about stealing, once it becomes something else. Envy, coveting. Do you see what I'm saying? It's not really jealousy anymore. Jealousy is not about our egos. It's not about how we feel about the other person. It's about protecting the fidelity of the agreement, which is why it's so upsetting when somebody doesn't. Right? Because we made an agreement. And I'll tell you, it's been weird for me lately, especially with my back hurting. And I said to Heather recently, I said, I don't like this. You promised me that you were going to stay whether I was sick or not, but I didn't know I was going to get sick. And I kind of feel like it stinks for you. Like, what if this goes bad? Like, what if I have to go through surgery? What if it's worse than I think it is? All right? And I said, I kind of feel bad for you that you got a raw deal. You're going to have to push me around? And she goes, that's the deal I made. So all of a sudden you start going, oh, there's some comfort in that, because it feels like the same thing that God is saying when he's jealous, right? Because all of a sudden it's not insecurity, which is what I need to do to feed my ego. It's about fidelity of the relationship itself, and all of a sudden that sounds like what God was doing when he's saying that he's faithful. That's what we mean by the word faithful, by the way. Is a person faithful? Faithful to what? Not to the person, to the agreement. Faithful to a person's hard, by the way, because people stink. Right? I mean, that's the problem. Faithful to the agreement is a whole nother issue. It shocks me. I mean, I use Johnny Erickson Tada all the time as an example, but you know that her husband married her after her accident. right? It would be one thing if they were together, they had this great life, they went on vacation, she got hurt, and now it stinks. He was like, I know it's never going to be normal, but I'm in. That's a whole different level. I don't think he probably struggles with protecting the fidelity of the agreement because it's not about his ego at all. I mean, he knew going in that it was going to be service. And not only him, he has to hire people to help. It's a whole different environment, right? Could you imagine? So when we get up there and we say we promise, I mean, you go back to your wedding. When you go back to a wedding, any wedding, and we say, I mean, what are the vows? Why do we even call them vows? I promise sickness and in health, right? Till death do us part. We're making a covenant, and it's supposed to reflect God's covenant, and God's covenant is even stronger than that. So no wonder it would make sense then if somebody's breaking that covenant and is not protecting the fidelity of the agreement, then, and it's meant to be exclusive, but it's no longer exclusive, it would make sense that that person's jealous. But what's funny about our culture, people go, don't be jealous. You go, don't be jealous. In this case, yes. And this is what's cool about it is it actually frees you up to be jealous for the right things. And then what you start finding is the more jealous you are about your marriage or other people's marriage or protecting marriage, you end up actually becoming more jealous for God and the covenant he made with us. Because then the things that we get upset about, which we're going to find out later, God gets pretty angry about, is because people keep breaking the covenant. So he's saying, he tells us right in advance, I'm jealous. It's part of who I am. If we're in a covenant relationship and you break it, I am going to be upset. And the two ways God gets angry, people think that he's wrathful, but they think of him as like a lightning person. He's just coming down and smiting people. No, that's not what's happening. He's either mad at the people he made the covenant with or mad at the people who are trying to kill the people he made a covenant with. That's it. He's always continually trying to protect the fidelity of the agreement. Do you see what I mean? It's all of a sudden, it's always, I made a promise. We just read it in Jeremiah. He said, if I didn't make a covenant, then sure, I would back out. I mean, that's literally what the prophet Jeremiah says. He goes, I would give up on Jacob, sure, but I made a covenant with Jacob, so I can't get out of it. So I will never abandon Jacob. I will never abandon Israel. And people say, oh, God, you know what? God gave up on Israel. That's why he's moved on to this new group of people, because they cheated on him. And he goes, that's not how it works. Right? That's literally what people are saying. Oh, Israel cheated on God, so now they're moving on. The problem with that is that makes God completely unfaithful to his own covenant. And what we find out is he's very jealous about keeping that covenant exclusive, right? And it's not just an argument for Israel, because Israel does not act correctly, right? This is not like we're so awesome we deserve to be, right? This is God trying to tell the world that no matter where you've been, you can always come back. No matter who you are, God can always save you. No matter what you've done, you can be redeemed. And by the way, he loved you before you loved him. So if you put yourself under his commitment, under his covenant, do you see what I'm saying? You follow his commandments, it shows that you care about the commitment that we made to the covenant that he made with us. Do you see what I'm saying? So it makes sense. I mean, there's certain sense, like it would be weird. If Heather showed up with her boyfriend, I would be jealous. And all of you would back me up. Do you see what I'm saying? She doesn't have a boyfriend, by the way. I don't think there's anybody. I've ruined everybody else for her, so that's how. You can tell her I said that. Okay, so the point is, right? The point is it would be weird, right? I mean, wouldn't that be weird if I said, hey, because we made do you see what we're talking about? So, the question is do we carry the full weight of who God is, the exclusivity of the agreement that we've made with him, and does that tell us about every other relationship? If God is at our center, does that change the way we look at marriage? Does it change the way we look at family? Does it change the way we look at friendships? Does it change the way we look at community? Does it change the way we treat our neighbors? Does it treat the way we treat humanity? Do you see what I mean? When we start with God at the center, which is what the Ten Commandments is trying to get us to do, if we know God is jealous for fidelity, for exclusivity, then we would also be jealous. So when people are not holding up their side of the covenant, then we should be upset too. And what we find is there are times where we're allowed to be angry. And there are times where we're allowed to be jealous. But not for the things that feed our ego, for the things that protect who God is and the covenant that he's made with his people. Do you see what I'm saying? So all of a sudden we start going, well, then why am I so angry? And why am I so coveting? And why do I care so much about what other people have that I don't have? And why does the grass always look greener? Well, I think it's because I'm not in the center. I'm all the way down at the bottom where it says not to do that. It turns out that we're all sinners. Do you see? I mean, at the end of the day, and I'm saying this for myself too, is I spend most of my time coveting. When I put it back in order, I start going, man, all the things that I've relabeled to make myself feel better, it's actually not godly jealousy. So, I don't know where you land a sermon like this. I've been asking, I said, Lord, you're going to have to come up with an ending for this, but there's no ending. It is a feeling, right? Jealousy is real. What were we saying? Wait, what's the ending? Ongoing. Okay, good. This will just continue on. But what I want you to do is, and this is why I gave you these circles, is throughout the week, what I want you to do is actually start writing in those circles the people that are in your life. Where do they actually land? What do you owe them? What is the weight of your agreement? Is it exclusive, right? Like, what is this thing? And you're going to find yourself, it's going to make you really frustrated. And I hope that it does. Because you're going to find yourself going, Now, that might be a good way to end this. Well, my parents, before they got married, they were already married, if you know what I'm saying. Okay. My parents were already married. So when they went to the pastor, they both accepted the Lord. And they went to the pastor, and the pastor said, hey, you guys are kind of married. Maybe you should get married. And they were like, oh, okay. Right? Now, the pastor could have said to them, you can't come in this building because you're living in sin. Right? And now a lot of times that's what happens. In most places, they say, you're not allowed here because you're already not clean. Right? But the best thing that the pastor did was wash their feet and let them in. Right? And it absolutely transformed their lives because it put things back in order. God wants to make a covenant with you, and if you're dirty, come on in. He will clean you up. But you better understand the weight of what that means. If he washes your feet, he better wash your whole body. You better get excited about what God is going to do. Do you see what I mean? So we want to become a community, right, that acts kind of like a family, that understands covenant fidelity, so that we can be jealous for the same things that God is jealous for. That way, when somebody comes in from humanity or from our neighborhood or from our community, we know what to do with them, and we know where to place them. They don't just belong outside. We should invite them in. If God wants to make a covenant with them, then it changes the way the relationships is. They're no longer just humanity. They're not even really just our neighbors. They become part of our community. What does that mean? Do you see what I'm saying? It should change the way we interact with one another. But it also protects the congregation because as a congregation, as a community, we care about whether people are holding to the fidelity or not. And that what we're really doing is deciding if we're going to protect the center. And at the end of the day, are we going to be a people that protects God's presence? Are we going to protect his name? Are we going to protect his time? Are we going to protect his honor? And are we going to offer that same honor and those same boundaries to one another? That's really the 10 Commandments. And that's really what it means to be jealous. Thanks, Lord, for the ending. Okay, let's pray. Lord God, we thank you and that you saved us before we understood who you were. That you came and got us before we ever understood who we are in you. And Lord, would you today help us to be jealous for the things that you're jealous for? Lord, we give back to you all the things we're angry about, all the things we feel ripped off about, all the things that we're coveting, all the things that we think we deserve, and we put them back in place. Lord, today we dedicate ourselves to protecting the relationship that you've designed for us with you as our primary focus. And Lord, would you straighten out every other relationship around it? In Yeshua's name, amen.